I thought I was just helping clean up before the holiday. I thought the mop in my hands was a gesture of goodwill, a small, unremarkable act of kindness toward a woman I was genuinely trying to get along with. I had no idea that the image of me on my knees, scrubbing the hallway tiles while my husband's two grown sisters sat on the couch, scrolling through their phones would become the moment everything cracked open. I had no idea that one folding bed delivered to the right address at the right time would say everything I had been too polite to say out loud for the past 4 years. But I need to start from the beginning because if I just tell you I finally snapped, you won't understand how long the road to that snap actually was. How quiet, how patient, how exhausting that road had been, and how absolute, how clean, how necessary it felt when I finally reached the end of it. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 4 years I've been married to Jason, a man I genuinely loved and believed I understood. Jason is the youngest child in his family and the only son. His mother, Brenda, raised 3 children almost entirely on her own after her husband left when the kids were young. She mentioned that regularly, not as a wound exactly, but as a credential. I raised all 3 of you by myself, she would say, with the composed, unwavering dignity of someone presenting an invoice. And everyone around her, including Jason, accepted that invoice without reading the fine print. I understood this about her from the very beginning. I could see that Brenda was a woman accustomed to being the last word in any room she entered. I could see that Jason around her became slightly smaller, not physically, but inwardly, as though her presence dialed him back a few years to a version of himself that didn't yet know how to say no. I told myself this was normal. I told myself he simply loved his mother, and that was a good thing, not a warning sign. I told myself she had a hard history, and that her sharpness was earned, and that patience on my part would eventually smooth things over. I told myself a great many things. Most of them, I now understand, designed to help me not see what I was already seeing. Jason and I lived in our apartment on the east side of the city. It wasn't large. 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen with a window that looked out onto the parking lot, a bathroom with a temperamental showerhead that Jason had been meaning to fix for 2 years, but it was ours. I had picked out every piece of furniture. I had painted the bedroom myself over a long weekend, standing on a stepladder with a roller brush, music playing from my phone propped against the windowsill. The living room had 2 mismatched bookshelves that I had found at a flea market and refinished. And I loved them in the specific way you love things you've put your own hands into. It was a small life, but it was mine, ours, and I was proud of it. I worked as a project manager at a mid-sized logistics company. The hours were long and the work was often tedious, but I was good at it and the salary was reliable, and it was entirely my own. Jason worked in IT support, a steady job, decent pay, flexible hours. Between us, we were comfortable. Not extravagant, but comfortable. Able to save a little each month. Able to take a vacation once a year. Able to go out to dinner without counting the cost of every dish. I mention this because later the money, specifically the fact that I made slightly more than Jason, and that the apartment lease was in my name, would become part of the story in ways I didn't yet anticipate. Brenda lived about 40 minutes away on the other side of the city in the house where Jason and his sisters had grown up. The 2 sisters, Karen and Diane, still lived with her. Karen was 34. Diane was 31. Neither of them had moved out. This fact was never discussed as a problem in the family. It was simply the way things were, the natural order of things, unremarkable and unquestioned. They helped around the house, Brenda would say, when the subject brushed against the surface of a conversation. They were good daughters. They were there for her. What this meant in practice, I learned slowly and then all at once. The first time I visited Brenda's house about 3 months into dating Jason, I was struck by how clean it was. Spotless, actually. The kind of clean that suggests ongoing invisible labour. The floors gleamed. The kitchen counters were bare and wiped to a shine. There were fresh flowers in a vase on the dining table, and the whole place smelled faintly of lemon cleaning solution and something baking in the oven. I complimented it sincerely, and Brenda smiled the smile of a woman receiving her due. What I did not notice that first time, because I was not yet looking for it, was that Karen and Diane were sitting in the living room when I arrived, and sitting in the living room when I left. And at no point during the 3 hours in between did either of them so much as carry a plate to the sink. The baking smell was Brenda's doing. The gleaming floors were Brenda's doing. The fresh flowers, the wiped counters, the folded dish towels, all Brenda. Her daughters received the benefits of a clean, well-kept home the way houseplants receive sunlight, passively without participation, as though it were simply the ambient condition of their existence. I didn't think much of it then. People divide household labour differently. Families have their own rhythms. It wasn't my house, and it wasn't my business. But I did start to notice over the following months that whenever I was present at Brenda's house, the invisible labour became slightly less invisible because some portion of it migrated to me. It happened so gradually that I couldn't point to a specific moment when it began. One Sunday, I helped carry dishes from the table after dinner. The next Sunday, I found myself washing them. One afternoon, I arrived to find Brenda mopping the hallway and offered to take over. A month later, when I arrived, she simply handed me the mop before I'd taken my coat off. A small thing, an easy thing, the kind of thing a person does without thinking because the social cost of not doing it, the look, the silence, the faint temperature drop in the room, was always higher than the cost of just picking up the mop and doing it. Jason never picked up the mop. In all the years I knew him, I never once saw him spontaneously take on a cleaning task at his mother's house. This was not because he was lazy in general. At our apartment, he loaded the dishwasher, he took out the trash, he vacuumed on weekends without being asked. But at his mother's house, something in him went offline. He would sit in the living room, or go out to the garage with some vague project in mind, or settle into a conversation with his mother at the kitchen table while I somehow was always in motion, always carrying, wiping, washing, tidying. And so were Karen and Diane, you might think. Except they weren't. They were on the couch. I raised it with Jason once early on. Gently, carefully, the way you raise things when you're still learning someone's fault lines. We were driving home from one of these Sunday visits, and I said lightly, more observationally than accusatorily, "Do your sisters ever help your mom clean up?" He glanced at me sideways. "They do their share," he said. Then, after a pause, "It's different when you're living there." I let it go. I told myself I was being charitable. I told myself it wasn't worth making into a thing. I let it go approximately 40 more times after that. The Sunday that broke something open, not everything, not yet, but something, was in early November, about a year into our marriage. Brenda had decided to deep clean the house before the holidays. She mentioned this to Jason on the phone, on a Thursday, and by Friday evening it had been established through some conversational alchemy. I hadn't fully tracked that we would come over Saturday morning to help. I had planned Saturday morning. I had a gym class I had booked 2 weeks in advance and a call with a friend who lived abroad and a pile of laundry that had been waiting patiently since Wednesday. I rearranged all of it without making a scene because that was what I did. And we drove over Saturday morning. When we arrived, Brenda was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, looking purposeful and slightly martyred in the way she always looked when labour was being performed. Karen was on the couch with a cup of coffee, watching something on her tablet with headphones around her neck. Diane was next to her, her feet tucked under her, examining her freshly done nails under the lamplight. Deep burgundy, very even, clearly recent. They both looked up when we came in, said hello warmly, and looked back down. Brenda put a mop and a bucket in my hands within 4 minutes of my arrival. Not rudely, she never did anything rudely. Exactly, she did it with a kind of cheerful efficiency, as though the distribution of tasks had already been decided, and my role in it was self-evident. The hallway and the bathroom floor. "If you don't mind, sweetheart, I'll do the kitchen." She was already moving. I stood there with the mop and looked at my sisters-in-law on the couch and felt something stir in my chest. Not quite anger yet, more like the precursor to anger, the quiet vibration before the frequency becomes a sound. I looked at Jason. He was pulling his phone out of his pocket. "I'll go check on the garage," he said to no one in particular, and disappeared through the side door. I mopped the hallway. I mopped the bathroom. I scrubbed the grout along the base of the tub because Brenda appeared in the doorway and mentioned with a small sigh that it had been bothering her. I wiped down the mirror. I carried the bucket to the kitchen, emptied it, refilled it. Through the open doorway, I could see Diane tilting her hand toward the window to admire the way the light caught her nails. Karen laughed at something on her tablet. The house smelled of cleaning solution and effort, mine and Brenda's, and the coffee going cold in Karen's mug. At some point, I straightened up, pressed a hand to the small of my back, and stood still for a moment in the middle of the hallway. The floors were clean, my knees were damp. I had been here for an hour and 40 minutes. Jason was still in the garage, and something in me, something that had been bending quietly for a long time, bent just a little further, right to the edge of its range. I walked into the living room doorway and looked at my sisters-in-law for a long moment. Neither of them looked up. I walked into the kitchen where Jason had reappeared, holding a cup of coffee that Brenda had made for him, and I said quietly, but clearly enough for him to hear me over the hum of the refrigerator, "Why exactly am I the one scrubbing floors at your mother's place when her 2 grown daughters are sitting on the couch?" He looked at me. Then he looked toward the living room, a reflex, checking who might have heard. Then he tapped his temple twice with one finger. The gesture was small, and it was almost casual, but it landed like a slap. It meant, "You're being irrational. You're being crazy. They can't, he said, his voice low and careful. They just got their nails done. I looked at him for a long moment. His expression was patient, slightly pained, the expression of a man managing an unreasonable situation. I did not say anything else. I turned around, went back to the hallway, picked up the mop and finished the job. Not because I agreed with him, not because I had accepted his answer, but because I had learned over 4 years that in this family the argument was never worth having in the moment, and because something in me had already quietly begun to make a different kind of plan. 30 minutes later, Brenda called Jason. I was in the hallway putting on my coat close enough to the kitchen to hear his side of the conversation. What? A pause. A folding bed. What folding bed? Another pause longer. He turned and looked at me across the hallway. His expression was no longer patient. It was something else entirely. I zipped my coat and picked up my bag. I looked back at him, steady and calm. Honey, I said, we should get going. The folding bed was a standard single, the kind you can order online for about $60. A thin foam mattress on a collapsible metal frame, the sort of thing you put in a spare room when a guest is staying for a night or two. It arrived at Brenda's house in a delivery box at 11:47 on a Saturday morning, addressed to her, paid for by me. Jason didn't speak in the car on the way home. He held his phone in his lap and stared through the windshield, and I could see the exact shape of the conversation he was trying to decide how to have. He knew that I had ordered it. I had not denied it. I had simply looked at him in the hallway, calm and composed, and said we should get going. And now we were going, and the question of the bed was sitting between us in the car like a third passenger. He waited until we were inside the apartment. He set his keys on the counter with a deliberateness that meant he was controlling himself, and then he turned to face me. Why did you send my mother a folding bed? He asked. His voice was level. He was using his reasonable voice, the one that meant he believed he was the adult in the room. I took off my coat and hung it on the hook by the door. Because she needs one, I said. She doesn't need a folding bed, Claire. She might, I said. If I'm not going to be coming over to clean anymore, she's going to have a lot more time on her hands. She could set it up in the living room for Karen and Diane. Since they apparently can't stand up for more than a few minutes at a time, they might as well be comfortable. The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence, not the silence of someone processing a surprise, the silence of someone recalibrating. That's not funny, Jason said. It wasn't meant to be, I said. He looked at me for a long moment, then he said, My mom is upset. She didn't understand why it was delivered. She thought it was a mistake. You can explain it to her, I said pleasantly. Or not, that's up to you. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Behind me, I heard Jason exhale, a long controlled breath, the kind that precedes either a fight or a retreat. I waited, watching the kettle. He chose retreat. I heard him go into the bedroom and close the door. Not quite a slam, but close enough to register the feeling behind it. I stood in the kitchen and let the quiet settle around me. And for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel the familiar urge to follow him and smooth things over. To say, I'm sorry, I was being dramatic, let's not fight. The urge was there. It was always there. 4 years of habit don't evaporate in an afternoon, but under it was something newer and considerably more solid. A kind of stillness. The stillness of someone who has finally stopped pretending not to know what they know. I should tell you how we got here, not the folding bed. That was a symptom, not a cause. I mean the 4 years before it. When Jason and I married, I had a clear-eyed understanding that his mother was a complicated woman, and I had made what I believed was a reasonable peace with that fact. I had accepted that Brenda would have opinions, had accepted that she would express them. I had accepted that Jason's relationship with her was layered and old and not something I was going to untangle or replace. These were the terms of the arrangement, and I had agreed to them consciously or thought I had. What I had not fully agreed to, what I had not even fully understood, was being asked of me, was the gradual, persistent, almost imperceptible reshaping of my role in that family. It happened by increments so small that each individual increment was easy to dismiss. Helping Brenda clean before a holiday, of course, that's normal. Staying an extra hour when Brenda mentioned she wasn't feeling well. Obviously, she's family. Cancelling plans when Brenda called with something urgent. It happens. Family comes first. Skipping my gym class, rescheduling my calls, rearranging my weekends, redirecting my energy over and over and over so slowly and so smoothly that I had almost convinced myself it was simply what marriage looked like, what being part of a family required. But Karen and Diane were also part of that family, and Karen and Diane were always on the couch. I started paying attention to this with more precision about 18 months into the marriage. Not in an angry way, more like the way you start paying attention to a recurring sound that you've been half hearing for a while and finally decide to actually listen to. I noticed that in the 2 years I had been coming to Brenda's house on a regular basis, I had never once seen Karen carry laundry down to the basement. I had never seen Diane wipe down the stove. I had seen them set the table twice, both times at Brenda's explicit repeated request. I had seen them load the dishwasher perhaps 3 times. I had, in contrast, done the following: mopped floors on 7 separate occasions, scrubbed the bathroom on 4, cleaned the oven once at Brenda's suggestion since you're so good at it, sweetheart, reorganized the pantry over an entire afternoon, helped carry furniture when Brenda decided to rearrange the living room, and spent 1 full Saturday in July steam cleaning the upholstery on the dining chairs, because Brenda mentioned in passing that she'd been meaning to do it for months. I had done all of this without being asked directly. Or rather, I had been asked in the way Brenda asked for everything, not as a request, but as a gentle, smiling assumption, as though my willingness was a known quantity, a reliable resource, something that could be drawn on without negotiation or acknowledgement. And Jason had let it happen, not out of malice, I believe, but out of the particular blindness that comes from growing up inside a system. You can't see the shape of it because you've always been inside it. The one time I had raised it with him directly, not the gentle sideways comment in the car, but a real conversation at home about the pattern. He had listened with the expression of a man enduring something he didn't believe was fully real. My mum doesn't ask Karen and Diane because they're always there, he said, as though constant proximity were a form of exemption from participation. You're a guest. I'm your wife, I said. You know what I mean, he said. I did know what he meant. That was the problem. After the folding bed incident, things were quiet for about a week. Not the comfortable quiet of resolution, but the brittle quiet of 2 people navigating around a subject neither of them has tested how to address. Jason was polite. I was polite. We ate dinner together. We watched television. We went to bed. We did not talk about the bed, or about what I had said in the kitchen at his mother's house, or about the temple tap that I had been turning over in my mind every day since it happened. On Thursday evening, Brenda called. I was in the living room reading when Jason took the call in the kitchen, pulling the door halfway closed. Not closed enough to signal that the conversation was private, but enough to muffle it slightly, enough to make me strain a little to hear. I did not strain. I lowered my book and listened naturally because the kitchen door was halfway open and the apartment was small. I know, Mum, I heard him say. Then a longer pause. Then she was tired that day. She didn't mean anything by it. Another pause. No, Mum. It wasn't an insult. I think she was trying to be helpful. A pause so long I turned a page of my book to have something to do with my hands. Then very quietly, I'll talk to her. He came back into the living room. He sat down on the other end of the couch. I kept reading. That was my mom, he said. I know. I said, she's hurt. He said, about the bed. She thinks it was a comment about her daughters. I looked up from my book. It was, I said. He looked pained. Claire. Jason, I said, matching his tone exactly. Your mother called me over to clean her house. Her 2 adult daughters who live in that house did not participate. I cleaned for 2 hours. You were in the garage. And when I mentioned this to you, you told me they couldn't help because they'd just gotten their nails done. I paused. I sent a folding bed as a joke. It was the most restrained response available to me. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, she's my mother. I know she's your mother, I said. She's not my employer. Another silence. He rubbed the back of his neck. Can you just call her and apologize? Or I can tell her it was a mistake, that it got sent to the wrong address. No, I said. He looked at me. He wasn't angry. That would have been easier in a way. He looked tired and slightly confused, like a man who has arrived somewhere he didn't expect to be, and is checking the map to see where he went wrong. Why are you making this into a big thing? He said finally. I'm not making it into anything, I said. I'm just not unmaking it. There's a difference. I went back to my book. He sat there for a while longer, then got up and went to the bedroom. I heard him on the phone again, voice lower this time. I didn't listen. I turned another page and read the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing a single word, because the thing in my chest that had been vibrating quietly since Saturday was getting louder, and I was beginning to understand that it was not going to get quieter on its own. The following Saturday, Brenda invited us for dinner. Jason confirmed for both of us without asking me, which was a habit so old and so settled that I had long since stopped pointing it out. I went, I brought wine, I was pleasant, I set the table. Karen and Diane did not, and I helped carry dishes from the kitchen. Karen and Diane did not, and I sat across from Brenda at dinner and smiled at the appropriate moments and listened to her talk about a neighbour's renovations for 25 minutes. After dinner, Brenda asked if I would help her move a box from the hallway closet to the upstairs storage. It was a heavy box. I could see that from where I was standing, and it would require carrying it up a narrow staircase. I looked at Karen, who was helping herself to seconds of dessert. I looked at Diane, who was checking her phone. I looked at Jason, who was in a conversation with Brenda about a car issue, and had not registered that Brenda had just asked his wife to haul a heavy box up the stairs. I turned back to Brenda. Her expression was mild, patient, entirely certain that I would say yes. Actually, I said, and my voice was very steady. Karen and Diane are right there. Maybe they could help. I want to finish my coffee before it gets cold. The temperature in the room dropped by approximately 10 degrees in under 2 seconds. Brenda's expression did not change dramatically. She was too controlled for that. But something in it shifted, a barely perceptible tightening around the eyes. Karen looked up from her dessert. Diane looked up from her phone. Jason stopped mid-sentence. Oh, Brenda said. Of course, she looked at Karen. Karen's sweetheart. Sure, Mom. Karen said in a tone that was pleasant on the surface and absolutely arctic underneath. She put down her spoon and pushed back her chair. Diane set her phone face down on the table and followed. The box got moved. I finished my coffee. Jason did not look at me for the rest of the evening. In the car on the way home, he said that was uncomfortable. Yes, I agreed. You embarrassed her in her own house. I asked her daughters to help carry a box. I said, if that's embarrassing, I'm not sure what that says about the situation. He didn't answer. We drove the rest of the way, in silence, but it was a different silence than the week before. Less brittle, heavier, the silence of something that had been put in motion, and was no longer going to stop on its own. I looked out the window at the city, going past the lit windows of other people's apartments, other people's Saturday evenings, and I thought, this is not a disagreement about housework. This has never been about housework. This was about what I was for in this family, what category I had been placed in from the very beginning, and how long I had been cooperating with my own placement, without even fully realizing it. The mop wasn't the point. The folding bed wasn't the point. The point was the 4 years of small surreners that had brought me to the floor of that hallway on my knees, while 2 healthy adults sat feet and admired their manicures. And I had only just begun to understand what exactly I intended to do about it. The conversation I wasn't supposed to hear happened on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after the dinner. I know the exact day because I had come home early from work. A meeting had been cancelled and I had left the office at 4 instead of 6, something I almost never did. I remember the specific pleasure of it. The streets less crowded than usual. The apartment quiet when I unlocked the door. The particular luxury of 2 unexpected hours that belonged entirely to me. I put my bag down, took off my shoes, and was heading to the kitchen to make tea when I heard Jason's voice coming from the bedroom. The door was not fully closed. It was open perhaps far in enough to hear clearly if the apartment was quiet, which it was. I stopped in the hallway. Not deliberately at first, just the natural pause of someone who hears an unexpected voice in an empty apartment and takes a moment to orient. But then I heard what he was saying, and the pause became something else. Mum, I know, a silence. No, she's not going to do that. She's been in a mood lately. Another silence longer. Well, what do you want me to say? She's not going to just, he stopped. Whatever Brenda had said on the other end was something he needed a moment to absorb. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Mom, that's not, I can't just tell her that. A pause. Because it's her apartment, that's why. I stood in the hallway and did not move. My coat was still in my hand. My shoes were on the floor beside me. The kettle was 3 feet away on the kitchen counter. The tea I had been planning to make was irrelevant. It's her apartment. That's why. He knew. He had always known. Of course he had. The lease was in my name. He saw the bank statements. This was not new information. But the context in which he was saying it told me something I had not known before. That there was a conversation happening in which the ownership of our apartment was a factor, in which it was something Brenda had a position on, in which Jason was being asked to do something about it, and was offering the fact of my ownership as a reason why he couldn't. Not because it's wrong, not because it's none of your business, not because Clara is my wife, and I'm not going to do that to her, because it's her apartment. That's why the distinction was everything. I stood very still and breathed carefully, and continued to listen. Mom, his voice was patient in the way it was patient when he was trying to end a conversation without resolving it. Let me see how things go, okay? Just give it some time. A pause. I know you're upset, I know, but I can't, not right now. Another pause. Something shifted in his tone. It became softer, more appeasing. I'm handling it, Mom. I promise. Just don't do anything yet. Wait for me to talk to her first. Don't do anything yet. Wait for me to talk to her first. I set my coat very quietly on the hallway shelf. I walked to the kitchen on the balls of my feet and filled the kettle and switched it on. And then I stood at the counter and looked at my own hands and took stock of what I had just learned. Brenda had a plan. I did not yet know what it was, not in detail, but I knew its shape. It involved the apartment. It involved pressure on Jason to do something. And it was something that Brenda needed to be held off from until Jason had a chance to prepare the ground. He was not refusing to participate. He was managing the timeline. The kettle boiled. I made my tea. I took it to the living room and sat down and thought with great precision and complete calm about what I was going to do next. I'd not confront Jason that evening. I know that might seem strange. I had just overheard something that should have produced an immediate reckoning. And instead, I made tea and sat quietly and let him come out of the bedroom 20 minutes later and say, "Oh, you're home early," as though nothing had happened, and I said yes. Meeting was cancelled, and we had dinner, and watched television and went to bed. I could feel him watching me at intervals throughout the evening, checking for signs that something was different, finding none. I was good at composed. I had been practicing it for 4 years. But the following morning before he woke up, I called my friend Rachel. Rachel and I had been friends since college, 14 years through 2 cities, 3 jobs, 1 broken engagement on her side, and the entirety of my marriage on mine. She was the kind of friend who listened without interrupting and asked precise questions, and never softened a truth simply because it was uncomfortable. I trusted her more than I trusted almost anyone. I told her everything. The phone call I had overheard, the 4 years of mopping and carrying and rearranging and cancelling, the temple tap, the folding bed, the dinner and the box and the 10 degrees temperature drop. She listened all the way through without speaking, and when I finished, there was a brief silence, and then she said, "Okay, first question. Do you have access to a lawyer?" "I know someone." I said a colleague whose husband family law call him today. She said not to do anything, just to understand what your position is. You own the apartment. You need to know what that means practically before you know what Brenda is planning, because whatever she's planning is going to involve that apartment, I guarantee it. You think that's what this is about? I said I think it's always been what it's about. Rachel said the cleaning, the dinners, the positioning. Claire, she's been assessing you for 4 years. What you'll put up with, how far she can push, whether Jason will hold the line, and now she's found the edges and she's about to push past them. A pause. Call the lawyer. And don't tell Jason. I looked at the bedroom door, still closed, Jason still asleep on the other side of it. "Don't tell Jason," I repeated. "Not yet," Rachel said. "Right now, information is the only thing you have. Don't give any of it away." I called the lawyer. His name was Daniel, and he had a calm, methodical telephone manner that I found immediately studying. During my lunch break, I told him the outline. I owned the apartment outright, my name on the lease, my payment history, 4 years of documented tenancy. I told him that my mother-in-law appeared to be pressuring my husband towards some action involving the property, and that I didn't yet know what specifically she had in mind. He asked several careful questions. Did I have the lease documents? Did I have bank statements showing payment history? Was my husband on the lease in any capacity? The answers were yes, yes, and no. He said, "Good. Then your position is straightforward. The apartment is yours. Your husband has no legal claim to it without your consent, and neither does anyone related to him. Whatever she's planning, a demand that you add his name, a request that you sell, a pressure to refinance with him on the title, she has no mechanism to compel any of it." He paused. "That said, I'd recommend getting those documents organised and somewhere she can't access them. And I'd recommend documenting any conversations going forward. Dates, content, who was present." I started a note on my phone that afternoon. Date, time, summary of content. I kept it methodical and unemotional the way I kept project notes at work. It felt in a way that I recognized as telling, more natural than I expected. The direct conversation with Jason happened 4 days later. Not because I had planned it for that day specifically, but because he initiated it. He had clearly been working himself up to something. And on Saturday morning over coffee, he set his mug down and said, "I want to talk about my mom." "All right," I said. He was using his prepared voice. I could hear the structure in it, the points he had organized in advance. "I know things have been tense," he said. "And I know you feel like the dynamic at her house is unfair. I hear that. But she's been through a lot, and the way things work in her house, it's just how it's always been. And I think if you could try to Jason," I said, "what did your mother ask you to do about the apartment?" The prepared voice stopped. He looked at me, and for a moment, just a moment, under the careful composure, I saw something. Surprise, yes, but beneath the surprise, something more uncomfortable. Something that looked briefly like being caught. "What?" he said. "Tuesday evening," I said. "I came home early. The bedroom door was open." I held his gaze. "What did she ask you to do?" He was quiet for long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer. He picked up his coffee mug and set it back down without drinking. He looked at the table. "She thinks," he said carefully, "that it would make more sense financially for the apartment to be in both our names because we're married." I said yes, and if we were ever to separate, that would mean she couldn't. I stopped, started again. "It would mean you would have a legal claim to half of it." He didn't say anything. "Did she suggest you ask me to refinance?" I said, "or just to add your name to the lease?" "She mentioned," he stopped, exhaled. She mentioned that it seems unusual that a married couple wouldn't have joint ownership of their home. It's not our home, I said. It's my apartment that I leased and furnished, and have paid for entirely by myself, before we were married and after. I paused. Does she know that? I told her it was complicated. He said it's not complicated. I said it's actually very simple. The question is why she has an opinion about it at all, and why you or I chose my next word deliberately, managing her expectations about it rather than telling her it's none of her business. He looked up. His expression was the one I had been bracing for. Not anger, but something more difficult. The look of a man who is genuinely divided, who loves two people, and is standing at a fork in the road and cannot seem to understand that standing at the fork indefinitely is itself a choice. She's my mother, he said. Again, the phrase that ended every version of this conversation. I know she's your mother, I said, and I need to know clearly, not implied, not managed, whether you told her that our apartment is not available to her opinions or her plans. Whether you actually said that to her, not it's complicated, not give me time to talk to her. Did you tell her no? The silence lasted a long time. Long enough that I heard the neighbour's dog in the hallway outside. Heard a door open and close somewhere on the floor above us. Heard the refrigerator hum. I told her I would talk to you, he said. I nodded slowly. I picked up my coffee. It had gone cold. Okay, I said. Then this is me talking to you. I set the mug down. I am not adding your name to the lease. I am not refinancing. I am not doing anything that changes the legal status of this apartment now, or in the future under pressure from your mother. And if she asks you again, that is what you tell her. Not that it's complicated, not that you need more time, but that it is not going to happen. Those exact words. He looked at me. Something in his face shifted. I wasn't sure yet whether it was the beginning of understanding or the beginning of resistance. And if I don't, he said very quietly. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, then I'll need to think carefully about what that means. I got up and took my cold coffee to the kitchen and poured it down the sink. I turned on the tap and watched the coffee swirl and drain. And I thought about what Rachel had said, and what Daniel had said, and what I had known somewhere underneath everything for a very long time now. She's been assessing you for 4 years. The assessment was over. My answer was no. The letter went out on a Thursday morning while Jason was in the shower. 3 paragraphs drafted with my lawyer's guidance sent to Jason's personal email. Clear, composed, final. I did not consent to any change in the lease. I would not consent. Any action taken otherwise would have consequences. He found it over his morning coffee. I watched him read it across the kitchen table, the slight stillness, the tightening around the eyes, and then look up at me. You got a lawyer, he said. I got documentation, I said, for my protection. He set his phone down. For the first time in weeks, there was no careful, managing expression on his face. Just a man who had run out of middle ground. Which side are you asking me to be on? He said, I'm not asking, I said. I'm telling you there are sides. You created them when you started managing her timeline instead of shutting the conversation down. So, which is it? He was quiet long enough that I heard the neighbour's dog in the hallway. Then you're my wife, then act like it. I said when she calls tonight, you tell her clearly. Not it's complicated, not give it time. You tell her it's over. Brenda called at 7:43. Jason answered it in the living room, not the bedroom. Not with the door pulled halfway closed. In the living room beside me. Mum, he said after she finished, the apartment is Claire's. It was hers before we married, and it's hers now. I should have said that 2 months ago. It's not happening. Not now, not later. Her voice rose through the phone. I caught family and respect and the particular frequency she used when facts weren't going her way. Jason waited it out. I love you, Mom. This conversation is over. He hung up, set the phone on the table, stared at the wall. Then I should have done that months ago. Yes, I said you should have. The dinner at Brenda's 10 days later, all of them at the table, was the last battle. She had Karen and Diane flanking her, her composure set to maximum, her opening move dressed in the language of family and good intentions and stability. I let her finish. Then I said pleasantly, what you're asking Jason to do would have given him a legal claim to property he has no financial stake in. That's not protection. That's transfer. I paused. I've been paying attention. I have notes. The words I've notes changed the air in the room. Brenda's folded hands tightened. Karen went still. Diane put her phone face down. The subject of the apartment is closed, I said. The expectation that I perform domestic labour while your daughters sit on the couch is also closed. I'm happy to be part of this family in a way that's mutual. What I'm not available for is being managed. Brenda looked at Jason. Are you going to say something? He looked at her, then at me, then back at her. Clara's right, he said. Quiet, final. 3 words that cost him something real. We drove home in silence, the right kind of silence. The kind that comes after something has finally been put down in the correct place. That was 8 months ago. Brenda and I maintain a functional distance now. Polite, bounded, collision-free. She no longer hands me a mop at the door. I no longer send folding beds. Karen and Diane cleared their own plates at the last dinner. I noticed. I said nothing, some victories are quiet. Jason and I are still married. We went to therapy, not as a concession, but as a choice, because we both wanted to understand how we'd gotten there. It is slow work and real work. And most days, I believe it's working. The apartment still has my name on the lease. I repainted the bedroom last spring, warm grey, different light depending on the hour. I stood on the same stepladder, same roller brush, and I thought about the woman who had painted this room the first time. Patient, careful, skilled at making herself small enough to fit through every door without friction. I don't paint like her anymore. The folding bed is still at Brenda's house. She never sent it back. I choose to find that,